Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good evening. I'm good, and you?
Oops.
Hello.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, very good. Okay.
Good morning.
By this time, we had 6,000 students who has done academic course in Jain philosophy, either certificate course or diploma. Some of them have done MA, MPhil, and PhD. Our students thought that apart from our philosophical thought and learning Tattva Sutra and various other things, we must do something on applied Jainism or applied Jainology. With this idea in our mind, we have a team of basically four people, Kavita Shah, Sangeeta Ji Chhajed, Dr. Mona Badani, and Vishal Mehta. These four people are taking the initiative to see that we bring some topics which are not more of a philosophical thoughts, but more of what can be applied in our day-to-day life from the principles of Jainism or Jain study or Jain principles. And in view of that, we conduct one program every month on the first Sunday of every month at 7:30. The time is standard, the day is standard. By this time, we had eminent speakers like Vallabhji Bansali, Dr. Rajmal was one of our speakers. We had a great discussion on use of plastics and reusable energy and things like that. So this is more of something which you can apply in our life for the various things. Today, I also see few of the eminent people like Dr. Rajmal Jain, Dilip Shah, and Mahesh Bhai from USA, and many more people. I welcome Sudhanshu ji, Dr. Jankhana Jeena Shah. Incidentally, my daughter is also Jankhana, and she's also doctor, and she's also practicing in USA. And also Svetalbhai Shah from Ahmedabad, who has been with government of Gujarat and doing a lot of activities in this. I really congratulate my team for bringing Sudhanshu Bhai and Dr. Jankhana on this platform. They are the people who have done a lot of work. I think Sangeeta would give detailed introduction of our speakers. But what is very amazing is that though we are the students of Jain philosophy, but we have equal love for Jain literature, Jain art and architect, application of Jain principles in day-to-day life, and etc. It's very surprising to see that 2006 years back, when probably climate change or the environmental degradation was not an issue or was not a challenge, Tirthankar Mahavir, in his principles, taught us how to take care about earth, how to take care about water, air, and etc. Which looks to be very amazing even when we teach to the people who are non-Jains. And when we talk about the protection of Chakaya Jivas, where we include Prithvi, water, the earth, water, and air as living beings, the people of other traditions are surprised to see that how Tirthankar Mahavir gave us the concept of how to protect the environment, which is very essential part. And we know now this particular century has been declared by WHO, where ecology has been most important concern for all of us. So with these few remarks, I congratulate my team. I welcome the speakers and the dignitaries who have joined over here. Over to you, Sanjita ji. Sanjita, you are on mute. You have to unmute yourself. You are on mute.
Okay, sorry. Good
Sorry.
evening, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this seventh show on Applied Jainism. We are really fortunate to have so many dignitaries on today's session and looking forward to an enlightening discussion. So I'm going to introduce the speakers, and before that, let me say a few things about the topic. यदि कोई हमसे पूछे आज विश्व की सबसे बड़ी समस्या क्या है, I guess almost everyone, mostly everyone would talk about COVID, क्योंकि हम सभी उससे इम्पैक्टेड है, हम सभी डायरेक्टली इम्पैक्टेड है और हम सभी अभी वर्तमान में इम्पैक्टेड है. बट एक्चुअली विश्व की सबसे बड़ी समस्या है क्लाइमेट क्राइसिस. उससे सिर्फ मनुष्य ही नहीं, सारे जीव जंतु एकेंद्रिय से लेके पंचेंद्रिय जीव तक सारे के सारे इम्पैक्टेड है. एंड फ्यूचर में नहीं, वर्तमान में. एंड लेट मी पुट दैट इन पर्सपेक्टिव. The world has lost, unfortunately, really unfortunately, 2.84 million people due to COVID. Roughly, I mean, about 28 लाख लोगों की मृत्यु हुई है कोविड के कारण पिछले 2 सालों में. And इसी दरमियान सिर्फ एक climate crisis related incident, if we just talk about one incident, which was Australian bushfire that occurred during 2019-20, that killed or displaced about 3 billion animals. 3 billion यानी कि 300 crore animals were displaced with just one climate crisis incident. That to just explain the gravity of the situation. So इस गंभीर समस्या को डिस्कस करने के लिए, समझने के लिए और जैन सिद्धांतों में इनके लिए क्या सोल्यूशन हो सकता है, इसे जानने के लिए हमने आमंत्रित किया है डॉक्टर जनखना जिनाशा और श्री सुधांशु जी, जिन्होंने इन पर बहुत रिसर्च किया है, and they have come up with Jain declaration on climate change. So to introduce Dr. Jankhana Jinasha, she is a practicing doctor in the US. She is board certified in general preventive medicines and in family medicines. But अपने profession के साथ she also takes active interest in activities of Jaina, which is the biggest Jain organization in US. She is also the chairperson of Ahimsak Eco-Vegan Committee of Jaina. Besides this, I mean, she takes part in a lot of other activities. She volunteered at Gandhi Ashram. She worked for Manav Sadhana NGO. In 2018, she was trained for Climate Realities Leader project. And post that, she worked with Sri Sudhanshu ji in co-authoring Jain Declaration on Climate Crisis. तो डॉक्टर जीना शाह के साथ में उनके साथी वक्ता है श्री सुधांशु जी. ही इज एन इंजीनियर फ्रॉम MIT, जो विश्व की सबसे विख्यात नंबर 1 रैंक यूनिवर्सिटी है. उन्होंने वहां से BS और MS किया और उसके बाद में ही वर्कड विद बेलकोर इन डिजाइनिंग इंटीग्रेटेड सर्किट्स. After working for 25 years across the different companies, he decided that he needs to devote all his time and energy on climate crisis instead of designing the next integrated circuits or switch chips. So since then, he has devoted all his time and has been working at various levels on climate crisis. With Citizens Climate Lobby, he meets regularly with members of Congress to discuss about the climate crisis problem. He was also trained by US Vice President Al Gore's Climate Reality Project to give presentations on the climate crisis to various groups. And of course, I mean, he co-authored the Jain Declaration on climate crisis, which they will be discussing and presenting to us today. He's also been recently elected city council man for the city of Santa Clara. So these are the two eminent speakers that we have today. And along with them, we have few more people who are working on climate crisis. We have Mr. Shwetal Shah. And thank you for joining at a short notice, Mr. Shwetal Shah. He's the technical advisor, climate change for the government of Gujarat in India. So he's working locally with our governments. We also have Dr. Rajmalji Jain. He's joined us from Ahmedabad. He's also working on climate crisis. So we are really looking forward to an insightful and enlightening discussion today. So with that brief introduction, I would request Dr. Jeena Shah and I would request Mr. Sudhanshu ji to take over and present. We're all eagerly looking forward to hear from you.
Thank you so much for that welcome and for this opportunity to present. I will speak mostly in English with some Gujarati. I am born and raised in the United States, and my Gujarati is full of mistakes, but it is better than my Hindi. So please feel free at the end to ask any clarifying questions. And when Shwetal speaks, he can speak in Hindi. I understand many of the speakers are Hindi speakers. And Sudhanshu will speak in English. But I hope that with the combination of our language skills and our expertise that we'll hope to have a good conversation with you. So with that, I'm going to share my presentation screen with you, and we shall begin. Okay, so this presentation is about applying Jainism to the climate and the Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis. And you've already heard our introductions. So we'll go into the next slide here. We are under the auspices of Jaina. Jaina is our sponsor organization, and our declaration has been endorsed by the Jaina Executive Committee. Jaina is the Federation of Jain Associations in North America. આપણી સાથે દિલીપ શાહ છે એમ પહેલેથી જૈનામાં ઇન્વોલ્વ હતા લીડર છે જૈનામાં કઈ પ્રશ્ન હોય તો એમને પછી પૂછાશે. So the mission of Jaina is to preserve, practice, and promote Jain Dharma and Jain way of life. And importantly, Jainism is so split into sects in many places, but in Jaina, the mission is very unique to unify the Jains of all sects. It's considered the largest organization of Jains outside India. Spiritual advisors early in the formation of the organization included Sushil Muniji and Gurudev Chitrabhanu. It was founded in 1981, formalized in 83, includes 72 Jain centers comprising of 150,000 members in the USA and Canada. And Jaina does its work also through 32 committees. And so the committee that we have written this climate declaration from is the Ahimsak Eco-Vegan Committee, of which I am the chair. Jaina Ahimsak Eco-Vegan Committee. Amaru su mur mission sushe is expressions of ahimsa. We support personal transformation, community education, and advocacy. Veganism is not eating, wearing, or using animal products. Generally, as Jains, we are vegetarian. Veganism is one step further. Dairy products nahi vaparvanu. And આપણે જેવી રીતે દેરાસરમાં જઈને leather belt ના પહેરીએ અને leather bag ના મૂકીએ. એ આપણે આખી લાઈફમાં we promote not using any animal products. And also reducing and eliminating activities contributing to global climate change and destruction of the planet. Given what has happened in modern times, the Jain concern with preserving life for the smallest creature, this worldview can be extended to address climate change, which affects from the very smallest to the very largest being, including our planet. And addressing that is part of ahimsa. I'm going to ask Sudhanshu ji, to talk a little bit about how he became interested in climate and what he found when he looked for the climate statements from other religions. So if I could turn it over, I'd like to ask him to speak a little bit about that. I'll mute.
Thank you for inviting me, Sangeeta ji. I really like the idea of applied Jainism. One of the things that I've been complaining about is the US war budget is $780 billion. That's 78,000 crore dollars. And Jains very rarely speak out against how much money the US spends on war. So applied Jainism is important to me because we need to be practical in today's modern world about how we apply Jainism to politics and the world around us. Anyway, as stated in the introduction, I retired in 2008 to work on climate change full time. And one of the things that was mentioned to me was this Yale University website, a forum on religion and ecology, and they collected statements from various religions around the world around climate change. And when I went and looked at the Jainism page, it had L.M. Singhvi's Declaration on Nature, which did not mention climate change. So I felt that since Jainism is, as L.M. Singhvi has mentioned, is fundamentally a religion of ecology, that we should have the loudest voice in the climate crisis. And yet our voice was missing. So I felt that it was important for us to have our own statement. And so I worked with Gina and we created this statement.
Thank you so much. I think it's very helpful to hear about how this all started. And I agree, it's important for us to have something contemporary. So as Sudhanshu mentioned, L.M. Singhvi wrote the Jain Declaration on Nature. And you all may know him very well. He's the famous Indian jurist, parliamentarian, scholar, writer, and diplomat. He was the High Commissioner for India in the UK. And he presented this declaration to Prince Philip at Buckingham Palace in 1990 to mark the entry of the Jain faith to the Network on Conservation and Religion. Two of the quotes that we thought were important are here. Jainism is fundamentally a religion of ecology and has turned ecology into a religion. And asteya, or not stealing, is the principle of not taking what belongs to another. It means avoidance of greed and exploitation. જે પણ આમાં લખેલું છે એ climate change નું પણ important છે. What the principles that are important for ecology also apply to climate change. It's that the problem is it didn't go far enough and it was a different world, right? In 2000, this was many years ago. પણ આપણે review કરીએ કે શું in principles એમાં હતા. Jain Declaration on Nature's na principles જે એમને લખેલા એ અહિંસા, બધાને ખબર હશે અહિંસા શું છે, minimizing harm to planet, people, and other living beings. પરસ્પરો પગ્રહો જીવાનામ, mutual interdependence of life. અનેકાંતવાદ, human view is not the only view of life. Samyaktva, equanimity, and જીવદયા, compassion to all living beings. And એની સાથે ચારિત્ર or conduct na principles એમને લખેલા અનુવ્રત, જે આપણે બધાને ખબર છે અનુવ્રત જૈનના અનુવ્રત એ બધા લિસ્ટ કરેલા. Kindness to animals. એમને vegetarianism નું લખેલું કારણ કે આપણે ખબર છે કે મોટા ભાગે Jains vegetarians છે. But from my point of view, from our Ahimsa Eco-Vegan Committee point of view, from the point of view of many of us who work on climate, we suggest one step further from vegetarianism to veganism. Back to L.M. Singhvi, he talked about self-restraint and avoidance of waste and charity. So just as an introduction, why am I suggesting one step further than vegetarianism? Well, it's been said that eating meat is like driving a huge SUV, sports utility vehicle, big car, right? Vegetarian diet is like driving a hybrid car with some electric and some gas use. And vegan diet is like riding a bicycle. So if we want to make the best impact and the least harm, then we like to go one step further. So continuing, Besides ahimsa, I mean, aparigraha and asteya are also important principles. And as we know, ahimsa is more than not doing violence. It's more than an attitude. It is a whole way of life. Veganism limits our violence to panchindriya, and environmental care goes to all life down to ekindriya. This is how I see it. Aparigraha, by limiting one's consumption and material possessions, one benefits the earth and all beings. And asteya means we refrain from stealing from our planet, from other beings, and from future generations. If we think about how we treat the environment, if we leave it worse than we found it, how will children and grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and future generations survive? This is just speaking of humans. How will future generations of animals and plants sustain themselves? This is the meaning of applying asteya and aparigraha and ahimsa to the climate. We have this story in Jainism, Kumar the Elephant, who was in the burning forest, surrounded, and all the animals were gathered in the middle. They were all fearful for their lives. And we can see how he raised his leg and saved the life of this rabbit. And he did this at the cost of discomfort. And eventually, this shows that he died. And the rest of the story, we may know he was reborn in a human life and he was reminded about this. I see some lessons from this story that are applicable to our actions related to the climate. Are we willing to tolerate discomfort to save others? And if we think about the actual setting of this story, there was a big forest fire. This is one of the consequences of climate change and the climate crisis. Can we help to prevent the fire? What can we do so that there's less of these threatening environmental disasters? So I think when we talk about climate, we can consider direct or pratyaksha versus indirect paroksha hinsa. We know that in Jainism, we are responsible for ajanya and janya, unintentional and intentional violence, and we face the karmic consequences. There are some forms of violence that we traditionally recognize, like eating meat, killing mosquitoes, killing other small forms of life. What we'll ask you to do today is think about if there's new forms of violence in these times. The principles are not new, but the world has changed. So in today's environment, the way that dairy cows are raised and abused, I would like to consider that to be a form of violence. Climate change, as we've just mentioned with the forest fire and the Kumar story, we can see on the right here the fires that are burning. We've seen an increase in fires all over the world, including our home in Northern California, where my family and Sudhanshu's family stays. And it sounds like you've had some previous discussion about plastic pollution. You see in India, the cows actually start eating anything in their path. They're eating plastic bags and having sickness and death. Here in this picture, you can see a turtle has mistaken a plastic bag for its food, a fish, jellyfish. It can also, it and other creatures from the sea also suffer. So we want to do our part to prevent these new forms of violence that may be indirect. We're not trying to kill the turtle. We're not trying to cause a fire. We're not trying to kill the cows. But by our habits, by our ways of living, we're causing this paroksha indirect hinsa. So this is a cause for us to consider what are our intentions, what is our impact, and what are our responsibilities. Apni jawabdari શું છે? આપણે વિચાર કરવી જોઈએ કે શું આપણે કરીએ છીએ, ખરેખર શું થાય છે આપણા actions ના લીધે. So one example, as I mentioned, I think you've talked about plastics before, but you can see in this ocean, in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and there are 4 more like it in the world, this big floating patch of garbage, which hurts all of the living beings in the sea. Anytime we drink unthinkingly water from a plastic bottle and it ends up in waste, this is what we're contributing to. So that's why we need to be very careful and mindful, think carefully about what we're doing. Climate change is a crisis. We called it the Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis. And with credit to Svetalbai, I'm trying to translate in Gujarati here. I may not have done it quite right. Jal Vayu Parivartan Apati che. It's a crisis. This slide is from the climate realities training that Sudhanshuji, Shvetalji, and I all took at different times. Al Gore, the former vice president of the US, is kind enough to share some of the slides with anyone who wants to present it. The point of this slide is to show you that the surface temperature has been increasingly getting hotter from the, and I'm having a little trouble with the windows here. If you see my cursor moving, I'm just trying to move the window so I can show you the chart. But between 1880 and about the 1950s, you can see the bar showing that the global temperature was actually lower than kind of the average in many time frames here. But since we started using what we call fossil fuels, it's increased. You can see the red bars getting higher and higher and higher until we get to 2016, which was a El Nino year. This was a specific climate abnormality. And 2020 is not far below it. This is the most recent year that we have the data for. So this is this graphic depiction of the problem. And this slide was made, I think, in August of 2020. So at that time, they said, there's a 70% chance 2020 will be the hottest year ever. I'm going to turn it over to Sudhanshu, who can talk us through the next several slides about the greenhouse effect and how it can explain what's happening to the climate.
So there's been some debate about climate change, whether this carbon dioxide that we're emitting from burning fossil fuels is actually causing heating of the planet. And we call it the greenhouse effect because it's exactly the same as a greenhouse. So as you know, you can grow in Nepal, they have greenhouses, they can grow vegetables in their harsh climates without having to put a heater inside. Somehow the greenhouse stays warm without a heater. And so I'm just going to explain the physics of this. The glass or plastic that we make the greenhouse out of lets light through, so we can see through it. So the visible light is coming through the glass. It turns out that glass is opaque to heat or infrared. It's the same type of light, it's just a different color. It's a color that we can't see with our eyes. But we have special cameras that can see infrared. And so what you see here is number 2 is the near infrared and number 3 is the visible. It goes through the glass, but when it goes inside, it gets absorbed by the materials and it gets re-radiated in infrared. So you'll see the orange when it comes down inside, it turns into this red, which is the far infrared. And that cannot get through the glass. So that energy, the heat, gets trapped inside the greenhouse. So if you go to the next slide. And so what we've done is because of the burning of fossil fuels, and we burn about enough fossil fuels to put 40 billion tons of, which is 4,000 crore tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. And that creates this blanket. And CO2 has the similar properties of the glass. It lets the visible through, but the infrared, the heat, cannot get back out. So it's as if we have covered the planet with a greenhouse, like a layer of glass, and turned the planet into a greenhouse. So that's basic physics. You can't argue with that physics. And that's what has caused the increased temperature on the planet. Can you advance, Gina, this thing is, I want to see all of the pictures. Okay, so what happens is, this is just another picture of it. The visible, which is these yellow rays, come down, they get absorbed by the planet, they get re-radiated as the purple rays, which are the infrared. And some of that gets bounced back off of the CO2. Now, if we had no greenhouse gases in our environment at all, the planet would be a frozen ball of ice. So we need some greenhouse gases in the air to keep the planet at a comfortable temperature. But if you look at the right slide, you can see with our burning of fossil fuels, we have increased that blanket, that the thickness of that greenhouse gas. And so in the purple lines, you see more of the heat being kept on the planet. And so the planet has increased by 1 degree Celsius. And many people think, oh, 1 degree, what is that? That's not very much. Daily temperature varies by 5 to 7 degrees Celsius. But if you think about having a fever, your body, when you have a 1 degree Celsius fever, you don't feel very good. And the planet is a biological system. So it's very sensitive to temperatures. So next slide. And so here you see where the burning of fossil fuels comes over history. Originally, we burned all coal. And then when we discovered oil, we started burning oil. That's the blue. And then we discovered natural gas, and that's the red. So you can see the proportions of what we're burning now. And we're putting 35 billion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere every year. Next slide. Okay, here we go. So this just shows the sources of greenhouse gases: burning crops, fertilizers create nitrous oxides, forest burning. Next slide.
That one was a surprise to Sudhanshu. It was an insertion from the Al Gore deck, but thank you for reading through that one as well.
Yeah, I looked through the deck last night, so keep going.
I am trying to find the arrow. Oh, here it is. Okay. Yeah.
You can also hit the arrows on your keyboard.
Yep.
So a lot of people are like, well, temperatures have been different in history before. And so it turns out you can go back in history by looking at ice cores in the Antarctic, and you can look at CO2 levels, temperature, and methane. And this graph goes from today on the left side all the way to 700,000 years earlier on the right side. And if you look in the middle, you'll see temperature in black. And all of those lows are ice ages, where you see the low temperatures, those are ice ages. And so you can see over time, we've noticed many ice ages, and the planet has always recovered. And these ice ages come from the variations of the Earth's axis and the elliptical orbit around the sun. And so, but the main point here is, if you look at CO2 and temperature, if you look at these graphs, they're very similar, okay? And what you see is, over this time, CO2 levels have never been above 290 parts per million. But when we started burning fossil fuels, we're now at 415 parts per million. So we're actually off this chart. We're if you look at the leftmost side there, you'll see we're way up there. And you can see temperatures are almost at some of the hottest temperatures. So the thing is, the temperature is behind the CO2 levels because the oceans have a lot of heat capacity and they can store a lot of energy. It takes a long time for them to warm up. But the thing is that the CO2 levels indicate that the temperatures will increase quite a bit more than they are now. And so this graph actually convinced me to retire and work on climate change full time, because we're basically off the scale. We have no idea what's going to happen to the planet because we don't have a historical record of what happened. And the other thing is, when we had these ice ages, we didn't have tens of billions of people living in cities along our coast, like Mumbai, right? What happens when Mumbai floods? It will displace many, many people. So, okay, next slide.
I'll just add one more thing here is that we have methane here. So we talk about carbon dioxide, but methane is also a greenhouse gas. And I think the next slide is talking a little bit about that, which is that agriculture is also a big contributor to greenhouse gases or greenhouse value. And we saw in the previous slide that we had lots of industrial sources, but it's also burning of fossil fuels such as coal and factory farming, raising animals for meat, milk, and dairy products, which is katal khana or yantri kheti, which contributes with the methane. And just as another note about this, we may think that as Jains we're not contributing, but our appetite for dairy products has made India a top beef exporter and is part of this whole factory farming process. And so this slide talks about the contribution of factory farming to this, they call it the carbon dioxide equivalent or CO2 equivalent emissions. It ranges from 18% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions from a 2006 report to 51% from a World Watch Institute report in 2009. And maybe Sudhanshu, if you could just say a word about how to interpret this difference. I think we know it's
Well,
significant.
I don't actually want to go into this. We're running behind time. We're actually at 7:40 now, or my time. So fundamentally, there's different ways that you can look at the impact of methane. You can look at a 20 times multiplier and an 80 times multiplier. I prefer to use the 80 times multiplier. And so you can look at it different ways.
Okay, suffice to say it is an important contributor. And I'll start talking about this, and then Sudhanshu, please feel free to explain further if needed. So this slide shows by countries, China, US, EU, and India, the CO2 emissions allocated to what they call the point of emissions, which has to do with production and export versus consumption, how much is actually used. So for a country like China and India, the CO2 associated with the production is higher than the consumption because of what they're manufacturing and exporting. For countries like the US and in the EU, their consumption is much higher. And it translates to a similar situation here when you look per capita, that the consumption is very high in the US. So bottom line, don't try to consume like the US if you're living in a place like India where the consumption per capita is much less, because it's contributing disproportionately to the problem.
Well, the point is that the message of aparigraha is very important here, because everything that you produce and consume requires energy. And so there are carbon dioxide emissions related to the manufacturing of goods. So the more you consume, the higher your carbon footprint is. And so Americans are very consumptive and wasteful. So we're at 17 tons per person, whereas only 2 tons per person for India. Of course, Indians aspire to be like Americans, which is not a great trend. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I'll just note that we know there's a large difference in India between the folks that are upper middle class, upper class versus the poor people. And so when you even it out per capita, it looks low, but we know probably in your own life examples of people who use a lot of, are very consumptive even in India. And so we all can do our part. If we just think about the diet aspect, diet footprint, so your contribution to carbon dioxide emissions is the lowest with the vegan diet, second lowest vegetarian diet. And among the items of common proteins and vegetables that people consume, the greenhouse gas emissions we can see is fairly high for cheese. Eggs is in the middle here. Milk is only low because of the high quantity of water, But you can see that the dairy products are in among the other animal products here. But food is not the only story here. There's also a big contribution from transportation, housing, other goods and services, as well as food. And so if we look here at the typical US household carbon footprint, motor vehicle fuel is a huge component, as well as things like air travel. And in housing, the use of natural gas, and this must be electricity from non-renewable sources. These also make up some part of the emissions. Also, although this is green, so this portion is fine. Sudhanshu, I think I might be glossing over something here. Is there anything else you want to say about this particular slide?
Nope.
Okay. So we talked about how climate change occurs, how serious of an issue it is. And so now we'll talk about the impact. There are some very disturbing trends. In the area of California that Sudhanshu's family and my family live, we experienced the worst fire in California history with 86 deaths in 2018. This was the worst in 100 years since 1918. The 5 warmest years on record have occurred since 2014. And in the ocean, coral reefs, which house many different species of sea creatures, have declined by 40%. Closer to home, and I know some of the climate experts are in Ahmedabad, more than 1,100 heat deaths occurred in Ahmedabad in 2010. And when I lived there in 2015, there were 2,500 heat deaths with temperatures up to 118 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll just pause and ask if any of the Dr. Rajmal or if Shwetalji wants to say anything about local impacts in India or Ahmedabad in particular. If not, we can talk about that later on. We are in the middle of the 6th major extinction. So there are periodic events when a great variety of animals and plants die. And in this case, it's activities that we as people have done that have resulted in the loss of between 17,000 and 100,000 species each year. The last mass extinction around 65 million years ago resulted in the dinosaurs dying. And we estimate that half of all plants, animals, and birds will die before 2100. This scale of devastation of the planet is something that would not have been anticipated in our sutras, but you can see how much ahimsa would be relevant to this massive scale of violence. The environmental impacts are manifold, right? There's many different ways that we have changes in rising sea level, flooding, and submerged islands. And as Sudhanshu mentioned, submerged coastal areas, for example, Mumbai, changes in the amount and pattern of rain, increases in the frequency or intensity of extreme weather events like heat, fires, droughts, shrinking lakes, retreat of glaciers, areas that have ice, melt of permafrost, reduced summer flows of streams, acidification of the oceans, destruction of wildlife habitats, endangered species and extinctions, and in some, hinsa affecting humans, animals, plants, and the planet. We can see in this picture these polar bears that normally would survive in an environment that's completely frozen. They're clinging to their life here. They've had difficulty finding habitat, finding food. We have to be conscious of the suffering of these bears. Also, there are direct health effects. Changes in the environment impact our diet and our disease patterns. There can be decreases in agricultural yields as the crops that used to grow in one sort of climate don't adapt fast enough to the changing climate. We can have increases in the range of disease vectors. When I was in Ahmedabad, I had dengue. This is the Aedes aegypti mosquito. As the climate gets warmer, the range of mosquitoes may increase, and we'll see different diseases that we haven't seen in other areas. And whenever climate disaster strikes, the poorest people are the ones most effective. And we will find what is called environmental refugees, both internally within countries and between countries. This picture shows Indian villagers fleeing drought. There's a statement that was issued in 2014, which now seems very premonitory, right? It predicted the future. We've seen this already. Global warming will intensify the challenges of global instability, hunger, poverty, and conflict, leading to food and water shortages, pandemic disease, disputes over refugees and resources, and destruction by natural disasters in regions across the globe. So the next series of pictures I'll go through relatively quickly. These show some of the climate impacts in India and surrounding areas. So there's the cyclone that affected this border area in India and Bangladesh. And you can see here that the Bangladeshi farmer is the one most impacted here as this sort of disaster strikes. Cyclone hit a camp in Orissa in the middle of COVID-19. In Bihar, the monsoon rainfall was 50% higher than normal, and India's monsoon rains caused more than 740 deaths in July of last year. Chennai has ran out of its water as reservoirs dried up. So now we come to the Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis, Jalvayu Apatti no Jayarmano or Yadi. What are we going to do about this as Jains? Well, what I suggest is that we lead by example and by our advocacy. આપણે ગુજરાતીમાં કહીએ કે કરવું, કરાવવું and અનુમોદન. Show the planet that a healthy diet for all is critical to reduce global warming. All meaning Manushya, Tiransh, Prithvi. We have to take into account all living beings. Veganism is important because dairy means suffering, rape, and death for cows. Cheese also has the third highest carbon footprint. Besides our example, we need to talk with our friends about how bad animal food-based diet is for all of us. Finding a language that transcends culture and religion, but is still true to ours. We need to communicate beyond Jains, but in a way that's true to our values. What we have in the Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis as individual actions is to continue traditional vegetarianism and minimizing the use of water and waste, but go one step beyond to eliminate dairy products and transition to completely plant-based or vegan diet. The example of simplicity and individual actions is our own sadhvis and sadhus. As Shravikas and Shravaks, can we move towards the simplicity to choose least harm? We may not be able to give up our homes and our professions and our shoes, but can we go car-free or choose a small car or go electric? Can we reduce our flights? Can we live in smaller homes and use renewable energy sources? Can we buy less material goods? Can we think about our work and our business as areas of applied Jainism and make our work or business climate friendly? If we can help, wonderful. If we can at least minimize our harm, that should be part of what we do as Jains, as individuals. What can we do as a community? We can continue to learn and teach ourselves about climate change. We can use only vegan items in things like pujas and serve only vegan food in our community meals when we go back to having them after the pandemic. Instead of disposables and styrofoam, which I sadly saw even in India at Jain ashrams, why not go back to thalis, returning tradition, or use something very innovative like this cutlery made from millet and jowar by an Indian innovator, where you can eat the spoon and create no waste. And in terms of technology, we can add solar panels and energy-saving technologies for our temples. In the Jain Center of Northern California, they have solar panels here where the cars are parked under. And there's some cost savings and carbon dioxide emission savings. And we are saving more, almost 2 million pounds of carbon dioxide over 25 years. And so this slide is one that Sudhanshu made. When is your Jain Center going to get solar? The cost is going down and the availability is increasing. In India and Mount Abu, where we have our important tirth, Brahmakumaris have their center also. They have India 1 solar thermal power in Mount Abu, which is quite an inspiration. They've considered the current environmental crisis a call to transform our awareness and lifestyle. Our proposal from a larger scale for business and government leaders is to value ahimsa over short-term profit, increase beneficial and regenerative agriculture and technology, decrease subsidies, ban harmful products like plastic and chemical pesticides, remove CO2 from the atmosphere with reforestation, at least stop cutting trees. So you see this child planting a tree in this picture. And this is to remind us about government efforts that can be taken. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Shvetalbhai, who can talk about his work with the government of Gujarat and how he's been approaching this issue in the local context. Shwetal, if you could unmute. Or Rajmalji, I see you've unmuted. Please feel free if you have anything to say about the local.
Yes, good evening in India and good morning in USA. Can you hear me? I'm audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Jai Jinendra. I'm Dr. Rajmal Jain from Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO. Its unit Physical Research Laboratory, PRL in Ahmedabad. I heard your talk and presentation. Mainly you covered this CO2 emission part very well and tried to connect with the global warming. I just have to say a few things. First, I heard that global warming is already now finished in 2010 or maybe latest by 2012. But your data shows up to 2020, you told August 2020, that global warming is still on. So that you interpreted because of CO2 emission. But the data did not show any error bars, etc. Number two is my comment on related to the violence. Basically, all natural disasters, calamities, including even the climate change related to various aspects which you covered. And I wish to say the important 3 areas where we are doing all big violence. And I covered in my earlier presentation on violence and natural disasters, the scientific relationship. I would like to say that we are killing, actually the world is killing the microbes, very small organisms which we are not seeing, not only on the surface, terrestrial surface, but in the air particularly. So aviation has become industry, and that unseen microbes, unseen life is being killed every day in trillions and trillions and trillions, which were really responsible to maintain the biodiversity and to maintain the climate cycle. That is the point number 1. Second, by 1950, the world's population, non-vegetarian people were almost 70% of the world population. But now World Health Organization says that more than 90% people are non-vegetarian. I'm not sure, but this is what the data says from WHO, that in the world, more than 90% people are the non-vegetarian. Under that category, they have sent me the data, which says very, very cruel picture. And we have made it means ocean also as an industry, like we made aviation as an industry. So that is the serious issue. And I would like to connect as a physicist this important point that earlier in 2000, almost 20 years back, it was decided that we can do this carbon dioxide management by two techniques. One is by increasing number of plants, trees on the Earth's surface, and second, by saving the life inside the ocean, because each ocean life, that is the mass of any fish, let us say, which is also known as carbon mass or biomass. So it actually takes the CO2 and goes and deposits all the way down to the surface of the ocean. And that was the actually much more beneficial to human society. But we neither actually accepted and adapted this to save the ocean life. Rather, we, as I told, we made ocean also as an industry, and we have already killed many, many species, which, I mean, they have become extinct also. So billions of tons per year, ocean lives are being killed. And I don't know how many trillions of tons are actually microbes, and microbes are very much actually responsible for the bottom to up and up to bottom process between the terrestrial surface to the ozonosphere. So like that, we have started also mining, and we have also killed the species inside the surface of the earth. And you might have seen, which you point, I mean, have not covered, although the point, it is not a problem, no issue, but we have killed many, many species inside that. Now, related to the temperature. The temperature, it is not new that it is first time it is increased, it has increased to 0.5 to 1 degree. In the past, just during the only just 2200 years back, period of Ashok Chakravarti, the temperature was even much more higher. And even when you showed the data of millions and millions of years, in fact, it is a Malkovich cycle of the earth. And if we see the history of temperature, particularly taking the temperature of uncontaminated data of Greenland, I have some 8,000 years data, and I have seen that the temperature was many times much more than currently. And in fact, if you take the history of temperature profile, it is slowly coming down, in fact, in last 4,000-5,000 years. So we are in some kind of a dilemma that what we should do. But only one conclusion, I humbly and sincerely appreciate you, both of you, that we should make an effort through our Jainism, philosophy of Jainism, that to stop the violence against the animals by all kinds of efforts, whatever we can do as a community, as an organization, as an individual, as a religious, system, whatever. So I think what I will conclude and support to you, that basically climate change, that biodiversity is totally dependent on the various kinds of species, including the human being also. And so we should consider as a पंचेंद्रिय जीव जो है हम लोग, तो हमारा सबसे बड़ा कर्तव्य है, बड़ी ड्यूटी है कि हम जीवों की रक्षा करें और अपने इस प्रकृति के कॉस्मिक ऑर्डर एंड अर्थ ऑर्डर का जो रिलीजन है उसकी सेवा करें और हम पूरे प्रकृति को है बचाएं. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity. I would also request you to share your PPT to me if possible for you, and if you are allowed to do so, I will also share my PPT to you. Thank you very much. मेरी आवाज आ रही थी, सुनाई दिया मेरी बात आपको?
जी सर,
जी सर, यस सर।
एकदम स्पष्ट स्वरूप से सुनाई दिया। तो जो मेरे पूर्व के वक्ताओं ने बताया, अगर मैं उसको थोड़ा ब्रीफली रिपीट कर लूँ, तो जो क्लाइमेट चेंज की समस्या है, उसको हम बेसिकली पोस्ट इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन एरा में ज़्यादा देखते हैं, कि जिसमें फॉसिल फ्यूल वगैरह का यूज़ हमने शुरू किया 1860 से लेके, और इसकी वजह से जो वातावरण में जो वायुओं का अनुपात है, उसमें डिस्टर्बेंस हुआ, और ग्लोबल वार्मिंग की जो समस्या अभी चल रही है, और ये समस्या अभी खत्म होते हुए नहीं दिखाई दे रही है, क्योंकि पेरिस समझौता या जो इंटरनेशनल फोरम पे हम अलग-अलग बातें कर रहे हैं, इसमें हम
जी।
जितना हमें अचीव करना चाहिए टारगेट, वो हम नहीं कर पा रहे। तो ये पूरी मूवमेंट ग्लोबली जो चल रही है, उसमें धार्मिक लीडर्स और पंथ संप्रदाय, विश्व के अलग-अलग मान्यता के लोग हैं, उनकी भी बातों को महत्व दिया जाता है। और कुदरती विश्व में अगर सबसे ज़्यादा वैज्ञानिक ढंग से पर्यावरण के विषय को किसी धर्म ने पहले से समझा हो, तो वो जैन धर्म है। ये बात जैन धर्मी होने के नाते मैं अतिशयोक्तिपूर्वक नहीं कह रहा हूँ, बट जो हमारे पास इसके प्रमाण हैं, और जो 2500 साल पहले हमारे पूर्वाचार्यों ने जो बात हमें समझाई है, और जो फ्रेमवर्क उन्होंने सेट किया है, वो हमेशा के लिए उपयोगी है। अगर अहिंसा की बात करें, तो अहिंसा की बात कोई नई नहीं है, वो पहले के समय से चली आ रही है, और उसका सीधा ताल्लुकात जो है, वो क्लाइमेट चेंज के साथ भी है। हम इतना क्लियरली कह सकते हैं कि जितनी अहिंसा ज़्यादा, उतना क्लाइमेट चेंज मिटिगेशन, मतलब कि क्लाइमेट चेंज का अटकाव ज़्यादा। इतनी सरल समझ जो है, वो हम अपने जैन दर्शन के आधार पे से भी देख सकते हैं। अहिंसा को शांति के साथ अगर किसी दर्शन ने देखा है, तो वो सिर्फ जैन दर्शन ने देखा है, और हिंसा का जो रिजल्ट है, वो हमेशा अशांति है। तो क्लाइमेट चेंज भी एक प्रकार की अशांति है, जिसमें पृथ्वी पर के अलग-अलग मतलब फ्लोरा, फौना, ह्यूमन्स, एनिमल्स, मतलब सब लोग इससे प्रभावित होते हैं। इवन जैन धर्म में तो हम पानी, हवा, इनको भी जीव मानते हैं, और विज्ञान जिसको जीव नहीं मानता है, उसके ऊपर भी क्लाइमेट चेंज का बहुत बड़ा प्रभाव है। जैसे ग्लेशियर मेल्टिंग है, सी लेवल राइज है, फ्लड्स है, साइक्लोन्स है, डिजास्टर्स है। तो ये सब चीज जुड़ी हुई है, और उसका अगर कोई मूल है, तो वो हिंसा है। तो जैन दर्शन के आधार से हम देखें, और सबसे बड़ी बात अगर जैन धर्म में कोई की गई है, तो व्यक्तिगत कंट्रीब्यूशन की बात की गई है, कि हम थियोरेटिकल बातें तो करें कि ऐसा होना चाहिए, हमारे राष्ट्र के जो हमारे पॉलिटिकल लीडर्स हैं, उनको ऐसा करना चाहिए, वैसा करना चाहिए, उद्योगों को ऐसा करना चाहिए, वो तो बात है ही है, बट व्यक्तिगत तौर पे एवरी इंडिविजुअल क्या कर सकता है, और उसका सबसे बढ़िया डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन अगर कहीं मिलता है, तो वो जैन दर्शन में मिलता है। हमारे साधु साध्वी जी भगवान, हमारे आचार संपन्न श्रावक श्राविकाएं, जो एवरीडे के जो नियम लेते हैं, दिन के नियम लेते हैं, रात्रि के नियम लेते हैं, इन सब में आप देखो तो बचत की बात करते हैं, और आहार विज्ञान इतना जैन धर्म में है, और वो अहिंसा के साथ जुड़ा हुआ हो, ऐसा तो और कोई दर्शन में आहार के लिए इतनी डिटेल में बात नहीं की गई है। ऐसे ही पानी, ऊर्जा, ये भी विषय में इतनी गहराई में जाके सबको पुण्य पाप के साथ जोड़ के, जो एक मैट्रिक्स के तौर पे कर्म के साथ जोड़ के पूरे जीवन शैली में ये सब चीज को अगर गुथा गया है तो वो जैन दर्शन में है। तो ये जैन डिक्लेरेशन के माध्यम से हम विश्व के लोगों को भी ये चीज बताना चाहते हैं कि जैन धर्म जिसकी आबादी कंपैरेटिवली विश्व के और रिलीजन की आबादी से कम है, बट जो गहराई और जो डेप्थ और जो डिटेल्स ये धर्म में बताई गई है, वो और लोगों को समझने के लिए, आचरण में लाने के लिए और जीवन शैली के साथ जोड़ने के लिए काफी महत्वपूर्ण सिद्ध हो सकती है। तो ये डिक्लेरेशन हमारे जैनों की अंतरराष्ट्रीय स्तर पर एक आवाज बननी चाहिए और भगवान महावीर के बताए हुए रास्ते पे हम जैन के जो भी जितने भी फिरके हैं, जितने भी सेक्ट है, वो सब लोग इसमें एकजुट होके ये बात को अगर हम विश्व के फलक में और खास करके भारत में भारतीय अन्य दर्शनों के साथ हम इसको जितना साझा कर सके, जितना लोगों में प्रचलित कर सके, वो सृष्टि के लिए भी फायदे में होगा और अहिंसा की भगवान महावीर ने बताई हुई प्ररूपणा को और आगे बढ़ाएगा और वो अहिंसा का रास्ता विश्व में शांति की ओर हमें ले जाएगा। वो शांति सिर्फ पर्यावरणीय शांति और जीवों के जीने की शांति ही नहीं, बल्कि हमारी आध्यात्मिक और हमारी अंतरंग शांति तक वो बात पहुंचेगी। और वो जब लोग समझने लगेंगे, तो जैसे हमारे शुरू में भी बताया कि आज की सबसे बड़ी समस्या क्या है, तो कोविड है। तो कोविड भी एक ज़ोनोटिक डिजीज है कि जिसका भी अगर आप मूल देखें तो वो हिंसा है कि वो प्राणियों की कत्ल करने से वो वायरस जो है वो स्लॉटर हाउस और कत्ल खाने से आदमियों तक पहुंचा और आज पूरे विश्व को इसने हिला के रख दिया है। ऐसा ही क्लाइमेट चेंज की भी समस्या है। तो सबके मूल में अगर कोई बात है तो वो हिंसा है और सूक्ष्म और बादर सभी प्रकार की हिंसा से बचना और उसका जो डिटेल फ्रेमवर्क है वो जो जैन दर्शन में दिया गया है और भगवान के आगमों में दिया गया है, वो आई थिंक सबसे ज्यादा साइंटिफिक है और इसको ये डिक्लेरेशन के माध्यम से हम और लोगों तक काफी अच्छी तरह से पहुंचा सकते हैं। थैंक यू।
थैंक यू। आप शायद कौन, डॉक्टर शर्मिल बोल रहे थे?
श्वेतल बोल रहा था।
डॉक्टर श्वेतल, हाँ, ओके। मैं ये डॉक्टर, क्या नाम है, डॉक्टर झंखारा जैन, झंखना जैन, मैं उन्होंने कहा, पूछा था कि हमारे लोकल लेवल पे कोई बहुत बड़ा इफेक्ट हो रहा है क्लाइमेट चेंज का। तो मैं और मेरा एक स्टूडेंट जो मेरे अंडर में पीएचडी कर रहा है, मैं आपसे एक बताना चाहता हूँ, हमारे गुजरात के अंदर इंडियन ओशन जो गुजरात से लगता हुआ है, आनंद डिस्ट्रिक्ट के वहाँ पे, जिसको हम ये बे ऑफ भरूच के वहाँ पे जो है, वहाँ पर एक गांव है चौकाड़ी करके, जो समुद्र के बिल्कुल लगा हुआ पास में। आज से लगभग 30-40 साल पहले जब हमने रिमोट सेंसिंग की टेक्नोलॉजी से इमेजेस लेना शुरू किया था, तो वो करीब 10-12 किलोमीटर दूर था समुद्र की, जो कहते हैं बाहरी सतह, यानी आउटर लेयर। और अभी धीरे धीरे आप देखिए कि इन 40 साल के अंदर वो करीब 3 से 4 किलोमीटर जो है वो समुद्र उसके नजदीक आ गया है। यानी समुद्र फैल रहा है, जिसको कहना चाहिए कि सी लेवल का एक्सपेंशन जो है वो हो रहा है। और हमने ये पूरी कैलकुलेशंस वगैरह रिमोट सेंसिंग जो इमेजेस हैं 40 साल की, उससे ये एस्टिमेट किया कि अगर यही क्रम चलता रहा अगर 10-20 साल और, तो वो गांव ही समुद्र में डूब जाएगा। अब इसके पीछे क्या केवल सी इरोजन एक ही फैक्टर है, या गेल यानी जो गैस पाइपलाइन आ रही है वो वहां शुरू कर दिया 10-15 साल पहले, वो जिम्मेदार है इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन, या नेचुरल कोई सिस्टम है वो हो रहा है, और या हम समुद्र के अंदर वहां पर दूर दूर तक अंदर जाकर के फिशेस को पकड़ा जाता है, मारा जाता है, मतलब जो हिंसा का पार्ट है वो है। सो वी आर ट्राइंग टू प्रॉप दोज आल्सो, but I have already done a big survey and big study of last 80 years of this kind of killing of the various species, including the ocean and on the terrestrial surface. और उसको मैंने लास्ट प्रेजेंटेशन में जोड़ा बताया भी था कि कितने भूकंप आते हैं, कितने वोल्केनोज आते हैं और कितनी सुनामीज आती हैं ये सब करने से। और ये सब क्यों हो रहा है, मैं आपसे फिर से कहना चाहता हूं कि CO2 एमिशन हम जो जोड़ रहे हैं कि हम जो ये फ्यूल जो जला रहे हैं जिसकी आप बात कर रहे हैं, तो वो लेकिन इतना जिम्मेदार है फिजिक्स के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से जो देखें आप बिल्कुल, और केमिस्ट्री के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से देखें कि इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन हो रही है या हमारी ये जो वायोलेंस है उसकी, सभी 3-4 फैक्टर्स का एनालिसिस करें तो आपको मिलेगा, यू विल फाइंड इट आउट कि ज्यादा परसेंटेज जो है विच इज मोर इफेक्टिव टू दिस क्लाइमेट चेंज और दिस टेम्परेचर एनहांसमेंट एक्सेट्रा इज बिकॉज ऑफ द वायोलेंस। मैं ये जो डिक्लेरेशन वाइट डॉक्यूमेंट आपने बनाया है, मैं इसमें कुछ चीजें जोड़ना चाहूंगा अगर आपकी परमिशन है, और इफ आई एम अलाउड टू डू दैट, टू ऐड फ्यू थिंग्स which will be I think little bit novelty, और उससे हमारे जैनिज्म का जो भाव है, हमारा जो दर्शन है, हमारी फिलॉसफी वो भी दिखेगी, और साथ में हम वहां पर थोड़ा सा जिसको आप सबमिट करने जा रहे हैं UNO को या WHO को, तो हो सकता है कि थोड़ा बेटर इम्पैक्ट भी हो। तो इफ यू विश टू ऐड मी इन दिस, then I will be happy to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe I could just conclude and address a few of the points. So what I understood of the Hindi discussion is somewhat limited, but we're asking for people to go to this link I'll show you on the last slide for the Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis. There's one in Hindi and in English. The link in English, it goes to a place you can endorse and you can add your comments. And you can add whatever you wish to the comments. If we come with another version, we can consider incorporating more points. But now we're still just trying to collect endorsements and support.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So maybe I can just finish the last few slides and then I'll let the organizers decide how to do the rest of the questions. So we've talked about what to do and why to do it. The last few slides is I'm suggesting how to do it. How should we do actions? Using our Jain principles, advocate with Maitri, Karuna, Pramoda, and Madhyastha, right? With friendliness, with compassion, and with understanding if things don't exactly go how we like it. Do we really believe in karma and are taking it into our lives? Do we care for all life? Are we able to practice tyag, or are we just involved in bhog? I would like us to consider teaching and learning in Pathshala, bringing it to the children who are learning Jainism, and perhaps incorporating some of the actions into our Pratikaman. Some of the examples of the actions that we reflect on in our annual Pratikaman have to do with old economy, old practices. That's fine, but we can also incorporate new things. On this picture, you can see, at least in the West, we hear a lot about reduce, reuse, and recycling. I'm not sure if this message comes through in India. But Jainism is very unique in that refusing something, giving it up, tyag, is not unheard of, right? Where our religion is about being careful and having restraint. And if something does not suit our values, we don't take it to begin with. So we can incorporate this part in addition to the other parts. And then, like I mentioned, we have two places where we have the Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis. I am, again, not a Hindi speaker, really. I've learned a little bit in college, but I didn't grow up in India. So I had some kind assistance from colleague Raj Salecha, who did some translation, and we have the Hindi version here. The English version is available. This is where we have posted it, and you can endorse it and add your comments. There's a few places you can calculate your carbon footprint. We have our email and website here. These slides will be available afterwards. I'll send the organizers the latest version. I think I made a few changes after that. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone can use the slides, and we want to work together to make a difference. So I will end my formal comments and turn it back to the organizers to see how you want to proceed from here. And if you wanted me to say anything more in Gujarati, I'll try, but you can see how my skills lack a little bit. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and for Sudhanshuji, for Rajmalji, and especially Shwetalji, thank you for your contributions too. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jankna. First of all, let me have a chance to translate it in Gujarati, because born and brought up in Gujarat, studied in Gujarati, and then English, and then USA and all that. So my Gujarati is good. I would definitely do a justice to that. Second thing, I was very glad that you introduced Jaina very well. I want to tell all the viewers over here to join us for Jaina Convention 2021, which is going to be in July, and which is going to be a virtual convention. Let me also tell you that now Jaina has its own arm in India, which is called Jaina India Foundation. With the blessings of Dilip Bhai and Mahesh Bhai Wade, President, we have formed Jaina India Foundation, where obviously myself, Amol Shah, and Dhimen Mehta are the directors. I also wish that to declare over here that yes, we had an excellent presentation by all the speakers, and also the comment by Dr. Rajmalji. This platform is to use by all the innovative people to present their subject, which is related to the applied Jainology. So all 80 viewers who are there right now, I request to participate, not only bring only the speakers, but also try to participate in the activity which we have been doing. With these few remarks, I asked Sangeeta ji and Mona ji to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We have a small question answer session. I request Dr. Jankana to answer the questions. Is it okay, Dr. Jankana?
You mean the
Hello?
ones in the chat?
Yeah,
You mean
so
the
I'll
ones-
read it out. I'll read it out. It says the Indian government has set policies for increasing farmer income. This encourages activities like cattle breeding, etc. So how do you sensitize policymakers in India about the ill effects of such policies?
I would defer to those of you in India about how to work with the Indian government. But I would say in general, raise your voice as a citizen. Let your representatives know as a community and as individuals what your values are and how the policies will affect the animals and the farmers adversely in the long run. But in terms of exactly how to do that within India, I would defer, for example, to Shwetalji or others who've been working with the government to give you more direct. Sudhanshu, if you have anything to add, you're welcome to add.
Yeah, I would like to. So the population of the planet is a little over 7 billion now. It's expected to go to 10 billion people. And to feed that many people at the current way that we're feeding people would require chopping down more rainforest in the Amazon and elsewhere, which it will accelerate climate change and the species extinction events. So if 30% of the world's population went to plant-based meals, we would not have to increase any more rainforest destruction. So the purpose, I think, of our advocacy is to tell people that using animals for our food is a very inefficient way of getting our food. And if you want to feed the whole planet and eliminate hunger, you can do it simply by having at least 30% of the world's population become vegetarian.
Better yet, vegan.
Yeah, that was a very, very good argument that we can put forward. Shwetalji, would you like to add anything to this?
Yes. Actually, in India, the cattle population is also one of the highest in the world, what we have. And though we have many indigenous variety of cattle, which is quite climate adaptive, and still uh, our farmer keep them for agriculture and various other purposes, including secondary income from those animals. So the policy regarding animal husbandry is a little different in our country, but the concern is about the more and more promotion to slaughter and exporting meat, etc. And for that, we have observed in Gujarat in the last couple of years that a big hesitation happened, and some pressure was created on the government to stop those type of activities. But at pan India level, we require further actions to stop such activities.
The lessons from Gujarat may be very valuable for the pan-India level, so I encourage this group to talk more about this.
All right. I guess we have no more questions. I would request my colleague Vishal to give the vote of thanks.
Yes, I sincerely appreciate and thank Dr. Jankhana and Sudhanshuji to bring such a burning issue to the agenda of community initiative and giving it a perspective through by pointed out. Let's not think that it is just the problem of government or maybe big organization, large industry to curb this threat of climate change, global warming. It has to be led by the community through some innovative social initiatives. And today, fortunately, various digital platforms gives a lot of power, tremendous power to even a common citizen. So through this platform of Applied Jainism, I appeal everyone here today to join this mission to bring in the tangible change. A small link is present. It's given in the chat box today, wherein you can fill in the form and express your interest if you would like to, join this larger movement and maybe some structured program that will come up in the future. Thank you so much, Sudhanshu ji, Jankhana ji, and Shwetal bhai, and of course, Dr. Rajmal Jain. Thank you so much.
With this, we conclude our meeting. Thank you very much.